Who was Luke, the author of the third gospel of the Bible? The answer may surprise you. Well, Luke, the author of the third gospel of the Bible, also wrote the book of Acts. And if you add those two books together, they comprise, by some measures, 27.5% of the entire New Testament. And that's a bigger chunk of the New Testament than any other author, even the Apostle Paul. Well, the New Testament tells us four things about the man Luke, who wrote both Acts and the Gospel of Luke. He was, first, not an eyewitness. Second, he was a companion of Paul. Third, he was a physician or a doctor. And fourth, he was an evangelist. First, Luke was not an eyewitness, meaning he was not a disciple or apostle of Jesus. Luke was not a witness to Jesus' ministry, death, or resurrection. We know this because of how Luke introduces his gospel in chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us, it seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things you have been taught. We see from this passage that Luke uses two sources in order to compile his own gospel. First, Luke interviews witnesses of Jesus, and second, Luke references gospels that had already been written, like the Gospel of Mark, which was the first gospel to be written. Well, Luke needs these sources because Luke was not a witness of Jesus himself. Some people claim that Luke was one of the 72 disciples that Jesus sent out to heal the sick and to cast out demons, which is documented in Luke 10. However, I don't believe that because in Luke 10, he uses words like they and them instead of words like us or we. And Luke has no problem including himself in the story, which we will talk about in a moment. So first, we know Luke was not an eyewitness of Jesus. But second, we know Luke was a companion of the Apostle Paul. I just got done saying that in Luke 10, he does not use words like we or us. But Luke had no problem inserting himself in the story, which we see in Acts 16, 20, 21, and 28, when he does use words like us and we, showing or meaning he was part of the story. Acts 16, verse 10, after Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. Paul himself also admits that Luke was his companion and helper in Colossians 4:14, Philemon 1:24, and 2 Timothy 4, verse 11. The Apostle Paul refers to Luke as my dear friend, one of my fellow workers, and only Luke is with me. So second, Luke was a companion of Paul, but third, Luke was most likely a physician, a doctor. There's an early church prologue that states Luke was a physician. To be clear, this is not part of the Bible itself. It was an early church document. That said, there are clues that Luke was a physician in the New Testament as well. First, Luke uses medical terms to describe disease. For example, in Luke 14, verse 2, Jesus encounters a man with swelling of the body. Luke just names the disease, dropsy, by using the Greek term hydropikos, which is a medical term used nowhere else in the New Testament. Moreover, in Colossians 4, verse 14, we read, our dear friend Luke, the doctor, and Demas send greetings. It certainly makes sense, too, for Paul to have a physician with him, given how often he was beaten, flogged, stoned, and physically suffered. So third, Luke was a physician. But lastly, Luke was an evangelist, meaning he spread the news of the gospel and converted others to Christianity. Most likely, Luke was the only non-Jewish author of the New Testament. In Colossians 4, verse 10, 11, and 14, we read, my fellow prisoner Aristarchus sends you his greetings, as does Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. Jesus, who is called Justus, also sends greetings. These are the only Jews among my co-workers for the kingdom of God, and they have proved a comfort to me. Our dear friend Luke, the doctor, and Demas send greetings. All other authors of the New Testament were Jews, but this passage suggests Luke was a Gentile. As the writer of both his Gospel and Acts, Luke has brought the Gospel to countless individuals over the centuries. So we see that Luke was, first, not an eyewitness, second, a companion of the Apostle Paul, third, a physician, and lastly, that he was a Gentile evangelist. If you want to find out who Luke wrote his books to, check out the video in the description below, Who Was Theophilus?